guys, how are you? So, I've got the video for this week. I know I was meant to have it last week, and I was supposed to have read a particular book, and I haven't read the book, so I'm bringing you something else so that they don't yell at me. Okay? This was something I was planning on bringing anyway, but anyway. So, I have a book for you this week. But before we get to that, remember, if you want to support us, you can go to our shop where we have books and writing services. If that interests you. If you also want to support us, we also have a Redbubble shop which has over 100 different designs on it. We are actually working on one at the moment, so that'll go up as soon as it's done. But you can support us that way. If you want to support us but you don't want to spend any bread, man, that's totally fine. Just like, subscribe, comment, and share. Totally cool. Anyway, I have the video, and the video this week is on Max Porter's novel in verse, Grief is the Thing with Feathers. And I will be talking about the film as well, because it was the film reminded me, oh, I have that book. So this is Grief is the Thing with Feathers. And I got the film obviously because it has Benedict Cumberbatch in it. Because of course. Anyway, so Grief is a Thing with Feathers is a novel in verse. So, whole thing, all poetry. And it tells the story of a man and his two young sons who have just lost his wife, their mother. And the crow turns up. That's why there's a crow on the cover. He is called Crow. Grief comes into their lives. Now, the way that the book is structured is each of these three have part of the narrative. Crow is a speaking role. It's not just some presence that sits in the room. He talks, he interacts, he engages with this grieving family. We find out across the course of the novel how the mother and wife of these men and boys died, and we see how they cope with her loss and they cope with the grief, and that Crow is there. Crow is something that they are forced to embrace, whether they like it or not. So, the father is a Ted Hughes scholar. So, the Crow is not an accidental. The Ted Hughes Crow poems, which were published in 1970. Yes, all the Crow poems were 1970. Oh, Crow Wakes is 1971. But the Crow poems are all from the same period. The father is a Ted Hughes scholar, and the crow is a very deliberate symbol of that. The crow is Ted Hughes's crow. Max Porter's crow is a trickster god. He is difficult to understand. Does he mean ill to this family, or is he there to actually help them? It's very difficult to understand that. He is very much at home in the refuse of an ordinary person's life that has now just fallen to pieces because of the sudden absence of an important member of the family. He picks through. He's not kind. He can be quite cruel. Very cruel. In fact, there is one of the poems has Crow tell the boys to create a picture of their mother and that he'll bring her to life if they can do it well enough. And of course, it's a cruel trick. It's not real. The crow has no power to do such a thing. The crow is quite funny. He's a very funny character. And the alternating between the different narrators, the crow, the man, or the father, I think he's known as. We don't get names. Dad. He's known as Dad, and then the boys. We don't really get names. We are both invited into this intimate space, this space that seems very private, and also we're kept at arm's length in some ways. He's Dad. He's not given a name, which is both intimate and keeping you at arm's length. He becomes like Crow. The boys, like Crow, become archetypes. Grieving father, grieving children. These are they become universal in the narrative, even though they are specific, because the experience that they are going through is universal. Grief is something that everyone will experience. And you would think an entire book about grief would be possibly the single most depressing book that ever existed. And I think we've already told you that no, that title belongs to Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. That is the single most depressing film ever made. So you would think that grief would be this really heavy, depressing subject, and it is a heavy subject. It's not saying that it's not a heavy subject, but because grief and depression are not the same. Grief and despair are not the same, and that is something Crow is teaching Dad especially. Crow is there to stop Dad falling into despair, because despair will destroy them. Crow is there to keep them in grief, which is a process rather than a singular feeling. And because Crow is cruel, because Crow gives license, we see the unusual ways in which the boys process their grief. It's not actually unusual, but they are far more violent with each other, and the anger that they have at their loss, that they direct to those around them rather than because there is nowhere to direct it. You can't direct it anywhere. Crow licenses in some ways their behavior. It is very it very much engages with the fact that this is a messy process, and that once you experience that, it changes you. Crow changes them. Although they no longer have, by the end of the book, although they no longer have Crow actively in their lives, living with them, Crow is still there, because it's not like a one and done. Again, this is why grief is a process, unlike something like depression, which, can lift, and then hopefully you don't have that another episode. Grief is something that once you have had it it marks you, it changes you. And that is what Crow in some ways does to this family. It marks and changes and owns them. It takes possession of them. It makes them its. But at the same time, that's not seen as the worst thing. The worst thing would be to not have Crow, to have despair, which you can't get out of, to have no process, no guide through the dark. The Crow is a difficult kind of guide, a guide that you have to be careful of, be wary of. But Crow is still a guide in the dark when there doesn't appear to be much in the dark except yourself and your loss. So it's certainly not the kind of book that you would, that you just pick up lightly, but at the same time, it's not a hideously depressing book, okay? This is, apart from the death at the beginning, nobody dies in this book, which is, kind of an interesting way of saying that. Now, the linking of this with Ted Hughes is really interesting because I sat down and I read the Crow poems this afternoon. It was actually quite nice. I sat in the sun. It was interesting to read the Crow poems after having read Grief is the Thing with Feathers, and to read a little bit about the Crow poems, because the Crow poems were published after the death of Ted Hughes's lover, Alyssa Wheel, and their daughter, because she killed herself and their daughter in 1969. Now, these poems were written during their relationship after the death of Sylvia Plath, Ted's first wife, which does rather bring to mind that Oscar Wilde quote, "To lose one parent it looks like misfortune, to lose both looks like carelessness, to lose one wife looks like misfortune, to lose two," not exactly, she wasn't married to her, but to lose two looks like carelessness, Ted. But the Crow poems are very raw. They're very primeval. They're very brutal. They're very a person coming to terms with loss. So I can understand why Max Porter would have chosen the Crow poems to be such a motif through his own novel about grief. They are the work of a grieving man. They are the work of a man seeking to reconcile his dependency on women, but not necessarily liking it. They made me think, reading them also made me think of Emily Bronte. And I thought of Emily Bronte because I was thinking of the fact that, like Emily Bronte, Ted Hughes uses the landscape and the unforgiving nature of nature and the enduring quality of nature in his work in the same way. I was thinking of Emily Bronte because there's been so much discourse around Wuthering Heights. I watched something on Wuthering Heights which made me sort of have her top of mind. But she was actually someone who I thought of when reading these poems, which I doubt I don't know if Ted Hughes would find that as a compliment or not. They're both Yorkshire poets, so perhaps. But one of the things that did not get covered in the translation of this to this, God knows what this cover's going to look like because it's bright yellow, was the connection to Ted Hughes. And I saw quite a few people talking about, quite a few reviews talking about the fact that they made Dad a graphic artist, making a book about Crow, writing a graphic novel about Crow instead of a Ted Hughes scholar. Now, it makes sense to make a visual medium, a visual artist in a visual medium, being filming, writing is really hard. And it's really hard to see that as a process, because throughout the novel and throughout the film, Dad is working on a project. In the film, it's a graphic novel. In the novel, it is a work on Ted Hughes's crow poems, which is why no doubt grief has come in the form of a crow. Now, the other reason why it makes sense to change that element of the narrative is the kind of person who picks up a novel in verse is also likely to have a copy of Ted Hughes or know how to get a copy of Ted Hughes and to know what those poems are. Novels in verse, fairly rare things. You generally, you have to already like poetry to be bothered reading one of those. They're not a general public thing. So there's a good chance you got Ted. Took me a while to find Ted. I knew I'd put him next to Sylvia. I just couldn't remember which bookcase I'd put the pair of them on. They can squabble it out for all eternity next to each other. But, so I did notice that was a criticism of the film. I actually really liked the film. I really, really liked the film. As I said, Jude is the most depressing film in the world. This is not a depressing film, even though it is about grief. Because grief is a journey and you come out the other side. Both the book and the film take us on that journey. And so as a result, it has that cathartic quality because you are assured that for whatever you do really feel, for whatever purpose Crow is there, no matter how cruel he is, no matter what a trickster he is, Crow is there to help. It's just not the kind of help that necessarily they think that they need. Crow is the thing that they need. Crow the garbage eater, Crow the trickster, Crow the cruel, Crow the willing to look the darkness in the face and show you a way through it, is there to help. Crow is not a malign influence. Crow didn't cause Mum's death. Crow didn't create the grief. Crow is the guide through the grief. This is a cathartic story. It is into the underworld and out the other side, because that's part of the importance of the underworld, is that you enter it, but you also leave it. You don't stay there. Despair stays in the underworld. Grief comes out the other side. And that is an element of the Crow poems that you definitely see, is that this is the Crow in those poems is a cathartic god He cannot die. He is the creature that will play tricks and set things in motion. But he is an essential. He's not soft. He's not cuddly. He's not warm. He's not going to coddle you. Not even his creator will he coddle. He has been set in motion, and his creator no longer has control over the motion that he engages in. And so he is this engaging character, both in Ted Hughes's poems and in Max Porter. I would definitely have a look at it. I personally think I would, if I was given the choice between these two and Hamnet, I'm taking these two. I'm taking these two. Why? Because Crow makes grief a process and not performative, which I don't think Hamnet does. Hamnet looks performative. Grief in this is transformational. And I think that is the thing to remember, is this is about transformation. It's about change. It's about growth. And neither Ted Hughes, with the careless loss of a second woman in his life, nor the fictional dad and the boys, is able to stay in that place. They have to move forward. It's always going to be with them, but they have to move forward. It's the thing that that both texts really engage with. And so before, like, you know, if you're thinking of making your mind up about these, they are really interesting. I would recommend the Ted Hughes. This one, yes, you don't need to have read Ted Hughes to read this. You can read Ted Hughes. I would read it after. You don't actually need to read Ted Hughes before you read it. If you're the kind of person who would read a novel in verse, there's a good chance you'll probably read Ted Hughes. So it is worth having a look at, but it's not essential. As I said, the film takes Ted Hughes out entirely and suffers no ill effect. I would recommend both of these things. Yeah. So it's a heavier one. It's a heavier one certainly this week. The other book that I'm reading is, I don't know if it's any lighter. It's an Alistair Gray. It's an Alistair Gray, but I really hadn't had a lot of time to read, so that's why we haven't got the Alistair Gray. Yeah, so Grief is the Thing with Feathers is what I would certainly recommend to you this week. And I'm not sure who's going to be back next week. We'll have to have a look and see what we've got. But anyway, I will leave you with that, and I will see you again later with another book. So peace and love, guys. Peace and love. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.